Hey, sports history fans, this is Ariel Gonzalez from Wrestling with Heels On. Hey, when you go to a sporting event, you don't go there to be meek and mild, unless you live in Japan. You go there to get freaking wild. That means bringing some attitude to your amplitude. How do you do that? You get Racket. R-A-K-I-T. Racket combines a compact 7-inch megaphone, 8 powerful adjustable LED lights, noisemakers, an insert you design, and it's all fully customizable to match your team's colors. Now here's the coolest thing about this product. J.J. Abraham, the founder, was the ultimate cheer dad. He followed his daughter's cheer group around the country, and he saw parents struggling using all sorts of crazy contraptions to make some noise for their kids. And then he had an aha moment. He thought, wait, why not combine all of these doodads into an all-in-one compact device for the ultimate fan? JJ and his team worked 3 years on developing version after version after version until they finally landed on Racket, R-A-K-I-T, so you can make some noise and cheer and be a part of the action. So get out there and let's get loud. Bring a racket to your next game or competition to cheer on your favorite team or athlete. You can customize your racket with your own logos, drawings, and names. Get beads to match your team's colors. Flashing lights add to the excitement. Are you ready to make a racket? Be part of the game. Each racket pack comes with 1 racket megaphone, 1 lanyard to keep a hold of the thing, 2 scratch-resistant bead packs, 1 clear and 1 color of your choice, and a 10-pack of customizable self-adhesive inserts. Currently on sale, wait for it, $24.99. To pick up your racket today, head to myracket.com. That's myraket.com. Now get out there and make some noise.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The Rose Bowl. The game that inspired the college football bowl season has a long and storied history. The stadium itself is 100 years old, and in celebration of it, Pigskin Dispatch is assembling some of the top historians and authors to share the memories, people, and events that make the granddaddy of them all the special game that it is. Enjoy this Rose Bowl memory from pigskindispatch.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we are still in December, and it is Rose Bowl month, and we are celebrating the great history of the game, 100 years of the stadium named the Rose Bowl. And we have some great guests joining us. And tonight, we have one of those, Dana Auguster, a longtime historian and podcaster here on Sports History Network. Dana, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, man, thank you for having me, man. It's great to be here, and it's always a pleasure to be with you whenever we talk about football.
Yeah, Dana, you really have a passion for your teams, and I'm still trying to figure out how you have the California connection, because we know that the Chargers are your football team, and UCLA is your college football team. So
right.
It's interesting. How did you ever become a UCLA in San Diego / Los Angeles fan?
Well, if you notice, the colors are very similar. And I've always been partial to powder blue for whatever reason. And it's one of those rules that I have where it's really my real love for UCLA is actually the basketball team and the success that UCLA have had over the years. And plus, you know, watching the Rose Bowls over the years when I was a kid, I was just fascinated with the colors and it just seemed like their uniforms just stood apart from everybody else's. And it just was one of those things where I just gravitated to, just like the Chargers with the powder blue and gold, and UCLA is more of a collegiate blue and old gold. So that's where that love came from, as far as like my love for the school and those two teams. Even though I grew up in Louisiana, that I've always been gravitated to California teams for whatever reason. I don't know why. That just was me. Maybe I have a California soul. I don't know, but maybe that's what it is.
Well, I was thinking maybe, okay, Louisiana, we know the abbreviation is LA, and we know Los Angeles, they call it LA. We thought maybe that's
maybe so, maybe so. But if you ever been to Louisiana, and then you go to California, this is like a world of difference. So
that's true. I've been to both states, and you're right, quite a difference there. And the food is excellent in both, but completely different. That's for sure.
Right.
Well, we are going to talk about one of your UCLA Bruins Rose Bowl games tonight that you have some interest in and sharing some great memories with. And that's the 1966 game when they played Michigan State. And we're really excited to hear the history of this game.
Well, it's one of those games where it's one of those great UCLA games and it was actually one of the great Rose Bowl games that no one really remembers or really talks about, because it had one of the great endings in Rose Bowl history that a lot of people don't remember or don't realize or whatever have you. It was a game, like you said, it was Michigan State against UCLA. Michigan State was a 14-point favorite, in that game. They were the number one team in the country. I don't think UCLA was even ranked, but they were in the Rose Bowl. They had defeated USC earlier, and they had a roller coaster year. But somehow they pulled it away. They pulled out in the final seconds. To talk about, give you a little background of the season heading up to that really quickly. There actually was a rematch from a game earlier that year. In the first game of the year, Michigan State hosted UCLA in East Lansing, and it was a hard-fought 13-3 Spartan win. But UCLA under head coach Tommy Prothro, which I've always considered the coach before the coach, because he's always preceded a great coach for that particular team. If you look back, and I have a podcast topic that's just brewing in my head all of a sudden. But anyway, they were led by an unknown quarterback at the time named Gary Beeben, who, of course, would later on become UCLA's lone Heisman winner. But they lost in the season opener, and there was one play in that particular game where Beeben threw a long touchdown pass, but was called back because of penalty. And if you know anything about Tommy Prothro, he was beside himself because it wasn't a penalty, he felt, but it kind of like propelled them for the rest of the year. Michigan State pretty much ran through the Big Ten that year. The big win of the year came on a 37-7 win over Michigan, and actually, against Ohio State. And that pretty much propelled them to the Rose Bowl that year under head coach Duffy Daugherty, one of the great college coaches of all time. Again, not too many people talk about for whatever reason. And the key to that team was their running game, and of course their defense. And of course, when you talk about Michigan State and their defense in the mid 60s, two names pop to mind. And of course, there's George Webster and Bubba Smith, who later went on to play for the Colts. But those two guys were they were the engine that made that Michigan State Spartan defense go. And they rode that number one ranking all the way to the Rose Bowl that year under quarterback Jimmy Lee, who was a great mobile quarterback and one of the first Black quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And he was just an outstanding. He was the prototype quarterback for the 60s. He was a scrambler. He was somewhat short, but he was a scrambling quarterback and was very accurate. As for UCLA, after they lost their first game, then they went on a tear. They beat Penn State, Syracuse, and tied Missouri during that year. And, when you say Penn State, of course, that's Joe Paterno. Syracuse had a running back named Floyd Little, who they pretty much contained. And they rode that all the way to their big crosstown matchup against USC, which they ended up knocking off to advance to the Rose Bowl 20-16 in the Coliseum. But that wasn't the finale of the year. The UCLA's season finale was in the brand new Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium against Tennessee, against the Tennessee Volunteers in Tommy Prothro's home state. And they lost that game by 3 on a very controversial non-pass interference call in the end zone, which turned out to be an interception that Gary Beeben threw. And Prothro was beside himself again, and he was so bad that he had to apologize to all of the coaches and the officials of Tennessee because of how he acted and how he called all the names that he called the Tennessee officials, all the officials during that game. It was not. So you can imagine what that Tennessee drawl that he had, what it sounded like. But still, they were in the Rose Bowl. And they were facing off against the number 1 team in the country, Michigan State, and everybody thought that this was going to be a cakewalk for Michigan State. And unfortunately, and as it turned out, it wasn't.
A very good game. I'm surprised. Okay, now you said that UCLA was 14-point dogs in the Rose Bowl. Near where UCLA is, much closer. They're much closer to the Rose Bowl than Michigan State is, but yet UCLA went to Michigan State and lost by 11. So I'm kind of surprised that they were only 14-point dogs. You would think that would be a much closer spread than that. But
I think what it was the fact that they probably looked at the strength of schedule for that game. I think we looked at the strength of schedule, and of course, there was a major East Coast bias of college football even in the 60s. They had USC out west, but they playing in the athletic, at the time it was called the Athletic Association of Western Universities, which later became, of course, the Pac-8. But they looked at that and they kind of like, well, that's the West Coast, they play a much tougher brand of football on the East Coast and the Midwest. So there was some kind of bias there. And of course, they also looked at the fact that UCLA had never won a Rose Bowl either. They had played in, I think, 4 Rose Bowls up to that point and lost all of them. So they were looking at that, and then they looked at the defense and they looked at the strength of Michigan State, and they were prohibitive favorites mostly because of the bias, but them losing in the beginning of the year with UCLA losing by just 11 points. You're like, okay, they should have been closer, but for some reason, and UCLA showed to all of the odds makers that it should have been closer.
Well, yeah, these were, 2 spectacular programs. Just to sort of put it in perspective, the 1967 NFL draft, in the top 8, 5 players were either from Michigan State or UCLA in the top 8.
Yeah.
That's amazing when you have 5 of the top 8 are just from this one game. That tells you that the caliber of individuals performing in it and the caliber of teams that are playing in this great game.
And also, I think that's when everything started to turn. This is the mid-1960s, coming off the 1965 season, January 1st, 1966. I think that a lot of that bias started to turn, especially after this game, and all of the stuff that happened in this game was really a lot, but it was a great game and a great finish. And I think that it propelled UCLA into another level of respectability in the national consciousness of college football. Yeah,
it's I totally agree with you. This was a really a sort of a watershed moment. Coach Duffy really did a lot of things to bring Black athletes into the northern teams and into what we call the FBS today. And
Right.
He had a great all-star squad there, and it really sort of started the ball rolling towards having more of the African American players playing on the big time stage in college football.
That's right, because you got George Webster and you have Bubba Smith and you got Jimmy Ray at quarterback, which was something of an oddity. But Duffy Daugherty, to his credit, looked at talent rather than over everything else, and he wanted to win, and that was the key aspect of that. He wanted to win, and with him getting Jimmy Ray again, if I had to compare Jimmy Ray to somebody that's like a contemporary now, the first person would be Lamar Jackson. That's who he reminded me of watching film of him. Somewhat short, shorter than you would want to have as a quarterback, but he was very mobile and extremely athletic and extremely accurate passer. But Michigan State, like most Big Ten teams, really didn't throw the ball much. And they were just the typical Big Ten team, put knuckles in the dirt, 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of thing.
Yeah, it's but we had the opportunity probably about 6 months ago to talk to Maya Washington. She is the daughter of Gene Washington, who was a great wide receiver for Michigan State on that team.
That's right.
And through Maya, talking on behalf of her dad in this book, she gave a lot of great credit to the quarterback, to Jimmy Lee, of doing a lot of great things, and really he could have been a superstar and just had some bad things befall him that he didn't get the opportunity to do what he could do. But spectacular athlete, that's for sure.
Right. Now another thing about UCLA that gets overlooked is their nickname. That UCLA team's nickname was called the Gutty Little Bruins, and mostly because of their defensive front seven. Their defensive front seven was tiny, to say the least, even for 1966. It were tiny. The heaviest defensive lineman was John Richardson, which was their defensive tackle at only 225 pounds. That's light. For 225 pounds. And something else about that defensive line was one of the defensive ends, a guy by the name of Terry Donahue, which later would become the winningest coach in UCLA's football history. Terry Donahue was a part of that defensive line, and who I call Mr. UCLA, because he was a player, then assistant coach, then head coach for like forever. And he is Mr. UCLA Bruin in my book. But he was part of that Gutty Little Bruins defensive front seven.
Yeah, definitely. I think the defense was definitely one of the strong points of their team. But who did they have on offense? We know that they were putting some points up that year too.
Well, they had Gary Beeman, who was more of a running quarterback. But he could throw the ball as well as anybody. Running back was Mel Farr, later played for the Detroit Lions. He was their tailback. A receiver was Dick Witcher, who was an all-pro with the 49ers in the 70s. So that was their main cogs on offense. And again, Tommy Prothro, with him calling the plays, you never know what you're going to get with him, because he was the quintessential riverboat gambling coach. He would call reverses and flea flickers and all kind of different things to catch the defense off balance. And some of that genius you would see in this game, because a key play in this game happened from his riverboat style. Looking back at doing research on it, I said that, and it was a gutsy call what he pulled off.
So I'm tell you, these two teams are both very well balanced and great offenses, great defenses, and what a great matchup to come into the Rose Bowl to basically it's probably playing for a national championship here to say now if we look at it now.
Yeah, exactly. And this had a lot of national championship implications, obviously, because you had Michigan State, who's the number one team in the country. And of course, back then, what they used to do was they used to vote on the national championship. It wasn't like no playoffs or national championship no, they didn't do that. It was voted upon by the writers and the Associated Press, which was crazy. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember dealing with that, having the arguments and stuff, but this was the way it was. And it also came down to what happens in the other Rose Bowls. The Orange Bowl had a lot to do with the national championship as well. So it was an interesting time in 1966 as far as like college football was concerned. It was very interesting, especially towards the end of the year when you would have a lot of stuff. There was a lot of chaos. Let's just say that, a lot of chaos dealing with a national championship.
Okay, so now we know a little bit about the teams. Why don't you tell us a little bit of what was some of the high points of the game and how it came down to that close ending?
Okay, they were a 2-touchdown favorite. Okay, UCLA was the 2-touchdown underdog. They had coming in with nothing to lose and everything. The first quarter went scoreless. Nobody scored. Okay, and the second quarter, Gary Beeman, first of all, the Bruins recovered a punt inside the five, recovered a muffed punt inside the 5-yard line, which was the first crucial play of the game. A couple plays later, Gary Beeman scored on a 1-yard touchdown plunge to give them a 7-0 lead. Okay, and that stayed that way until halftime. Well, actually, Prothro called an onside kick. That's where the genius comes in. Right afterwards, he calls an onside kick, and the Bruins recover. The very next play, Prothro throws a 50-some-yard pass to Kurt Zimmerman, who catches the ball inside the 5, and the Bruins score again, giving them a 14-0 lead at halftime. And it just a 1-2 punch in the middle of in the second quarter to get the Spartans off balance. And to the shock of the nation, it was 14-0 at halftime. Offensively, the gutty little Bruins was holding down the Spartans for much of the first half. Jimmy Ray couldn't really complete it. In fact, Bob Appiza was the fullback. He really couldn't get started for the Spartans. So it was 14-0 at the half. Now, in the second half, they started to run the ball, continuously to run the ball, and they started to wear down the Bruins defense. You know, it was like they would get 3 yards, and 3 yards became 5 yards. 5 yards became 7 yards. That way, all the way through. And then Michigan State finally scored midway through the fourth quarter. It took them until the fourth quarter to finally score, and that was on Bob Appiza 38-yard touchdown run. Ran right up the middle, broke a couple tackles in the Bruins secondary, and was off to the races for 38 yards and a touchdown, but they missed the extra point. That is crucial. Whenever you see a missed extra point, even in the NFL, it always comes back to haunt you, and it did this case for Michigan State. Now, less than a minute to go, the Spartans get the ball back, and they drive down the field. With less than a minute to play, Steve Jude, which was the backup quarterback, he scores on a 1-yard touchdown run to cut the lead to 14-12. Then they go for 2. Remember, less than a minute to play, late in the fourth quarter. They go for 2 to tie. Now, with a tie game, Michigan State still can claim a national championship with a tie. They still could claim one. But Doherty, of course, goes for 2, had no choice, has to go for 2 to tie the game. No overtime in college. They go for 2. And that sets the stage for what is considered the greatest defensive play in UCLA's history. They pitched the ball to Appiza going to the right side. Out of nowhere is defensive back Bob Stiles, who is later named the Rose Bowl's most valuable player, for one play. And what happened was Appiza was this big, huge, strapping fullback. He goes around the right side. Stiles hits him dead on at the goal line so hard that he knocks himself unconscious. But he keeps Appiza out of the end zone and prevents the 2-point conversion, and UCLA wins. It is named, they did a poll about maybe 5 or 10 years ago. That is ranked number 25 on the greatest sports moments in LA history. Is him, and there's a great picture of that right afterwards when Stiles is literally being helped off the field. He was still kind of unconscious, but he knocked himself out to prevent Appiza from scoring, and that was the ball game. And it prevented Michigan State from winning the national championship.
Wow. So he's a great hero and probably doesn't even know it because he's got the birds circling around and bells ringing and stuff. So, wow, stonewalls him at the goal line to save the game. That is a tremendous ending. And I guess deservedly so, gets that MVP, for sacrificing himself to stop that runner from getting in. Wow. Yeah,
and there's a great picture of that, of the aftermath after that, where 2 Bruin players are helping him, and he's like limp, and he's like a sack of potatoes, and you can see Prothro in the background just, celebrating and stuff and tapping this, checking on Stiles and everything. But he saved UCLA, and it caused, again, controversy because later that night, Alabama played Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. and Alabama defeated Nebraska and ended up being claimed national champs.
Really? Okay. So Alabama became the national champions and not UCLA for
right.
beating number
because,
one.
Again, UCLA, I don't think UCLA was even ranked in that game. I don't think they were ranked, but I have to look back on it. I think they might have been, but it wasn't ranked. If they were, they weren't ranked very high, especially with them being 14-point underdogs.
Yeah. Wow. That is surprising that they wouldn't be ranked on, get the nod for knocking off number one. Usually the voting would normally go that way, if number one.
Well, I think heading into the game, there wasn't ranked, but afterwards I have to check and see what they were ranked in the final AP polling,
Well, I know Michigan State ended up being number two when I was looking at some research earlier, but I just assumed UCLA was number one. I didn't realize Alabama was the national champs that year. Very interesting. So yeah, I guess there would be some controversy.
Yeah. And again, and there are countless instances throughout college football history where there's been some controversy or some arguing back and forth or who should be number one at the end of the season. A lot of different instances.
Wow. But I thank you for sharing that with us. That's a great Rose Bowl moment, and really helps us to celebrate this Rose Bowl 100 during this month. And sure glad that you were able to bring us some great information on that game and the great players and teams that played in that to help preserve the football history. So thank you for that.
Oh man, no problem, man. Anytime I get a chance to talk to you about football, or specifically UCLA football, I love it.
Well, tell us how are things going on the Historically Speaking podcast and some of the other things that you're doing.
Well, right now we are anticipating who's going to be in the World Series, because I am efforting a fellow podcaster colleague of ours, Chad Kane, to come on with me to do a quick Historically Speaking Sports World Series Tale of the Tape. Historically speaking, that is, of course, because who is ever in the World Series, I'm going to give like a little quick rundown of their World Series or team histories, whether it's the Astros or the Phillies, which actually is the Phillies who just won the World Series, who just won the pennant this afternoon, and whoever comes out of the American League. So that's coming up on Historically Speaking Sports, and I have some other things that are just kind of rolling around in my head that I'm just trying to piece together. But right now, baseball is on our postseason. Baseball, more specifically, is on our minds here at Historically Speaking Sports, and I did like a little postseason field, kind of a tale of the tape, but their story, each team's stories in the postseason that made the Major League Baseball postseason. So that's what's going on with us right here.
Okay, and folks, don't be confused. We are recording this a little early. We're in late October, and I know this is airing in December. So make sure you go back and check Dana's Historically Speaking Sports on the World Series preview that he's talking about. But he's got a bunch more episodes since then too. But we're recording this a little bit earlier than
all
normal.
right.
So. So, Dana, thank you very much. And I know we have you on for some other segments for celebrating this Rose Bowl 100 history. So we will talk to you again in a few days or a week or so here on Pigskin Dispatch. We're talking to Dana Auguster. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, man, thank you, man. Not a problem. I love doing this.
We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here. But we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines. So be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, pigskinddispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskinddispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. PigskinDispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.